Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my mid-January wrap-up where I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read from January 1st to about January 15th, 16th, something like that. And today I think I'm going to try something a little bit different. I think I'm just going to discuss the books in the order that I read them rather than what I usually do, which is talking about the book that I like the least and working my way up to the book that I like the most, just because doing the video this way is just going to be easier for me. So with that being said, the very first book that I finished in 2021 was Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur. So this is book one in a new romance series from her. This is also a sapphic rom-com, which we love to see. We have our two main characters, Elle and Darcy. They are definitely opposites. This is definitely an opposites attract romance. It's also kind of a sunshine grump trope because to me, Elle is like the epitome of sunshine and Darcy is definitely pretty grumpy at the start of this book, and this has been marketed as having nods to both Bridget Jones's Diary and Pride and Prejudice, so if you love those two things, I think you'll enjoy this one as well. And so basically, Elle and Darcy have to fake date each other for different reasons, and I really enjoyed this. I think I settled on giving this 3.5 stars just because at some points I feel like the pacing was off, like sometimes it was a little bit too slow, but I thought that this was a very sweet and sexy rom-com. There's some really good smut in this, so yeah, I recommend it. I don't really have much more to say other than that. Then the next book I read after that was The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is a dark fantasy slash horror novel. This is book one in what is going to be a series, just so that you're aware. So this book is about our main character, Emmanuelle, and she is living in this very puritanical, cultish society. And I guess the best way to describe the plot of this book without spoiling anything is that there are these woods that are definitely pretty forbidden for the townspeople to go into because there are these witches that haunt these woods. So Emmanuelle ends up going into those woods and some very interesting and kind of scary things start happening. I definitely enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars overall. I would definitely describe this as mainly a dark fantasy with horror elements. I don't think it's a necessarily like terrifying book, but there are some scenes, there are some moments that are definitely creepy, eerie, and I would say kind of scary. So this book and this series is definitely a nod to the Salem witch trials. I would also recommend this if you loved the movie The Village, because the world and the government that this centers around definitely reminds me of that film. I really don't have much to say about this one, except that I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, so I don't know if I'm gonna necessarily continue on with the series. Next book I am so excited to talk about. Oh my god, this is The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune. I can tell you right now, this is definitely going to be one of my favorite books of 2021. I can say that without a doubt. I devoured this book. I absolutely adored it. Oh my goodness. So there is this meme going around on TikTok where people are talking about books that are gay that also slap. And this book is the epitome of that. Oh my god, it is so gay, it slaps so hard, it is just so good. So this is a YA series. It's the first book in a series, and it is centering around the idea of superheroes. So we have our main character, Nick Bell, and he has ADHD. And he writes fan fiction for this superhero, Shadow Star, who lives in their city. And he is just absolutely obsessed with Shadow Star. He wants to marry him, have children with him, the whole 9 yards. And there's also an interesting love triangle between Nick and 2 of his friends, Seth and Owen, which Seth and Owen have a weird, like, frenemy kind of relationship with each other, but they both have huge crushes on Nick, and Nick has crushes on both of them, so it's a complicated thing. Also, he has 2 other best friends that are both queer, and I loved them so much. Like, it's just a queer time, and I'm so here for it. Also, the relationship that Nick has with his father, who's a police officer, is just absolutely everything. I just love how he truly accepts Nick for who he is, and their banter throughout the book was just so funny. The second I was finished reading this, I thought to myself, Renegades who? Like, Renegades by Marissa Meyer wishes that it was as iconic as The Extraordinaries. I adore TJ Klune's writing style so much. Like, I can tell you without a doubt, this is only my second book that I've read by him. He's definitely a new favorite author of mine. If I could talk about spoilers, I would have a lot to discuss because there are some crazy plot twists going on throughout this book. Although I will say there were a couple of twists that I saw coming from a mile away, but this is a YA series, so, you know, I'm not gonna dock points for that. Also, I want to point out that the cover is reversible. Like, can we discuss the cover art? I just love it so much. So I am really pumped for the second book to come out. I think it comes out in July of this year. You can bet your butt I'm going to pre-order it. This book ends on a cliffhanger, so I'm just so excited to see what happens next. Also, one last thing about the Extraordinaries is that I loved that TJ Klune really played into the camp of having superheroes. You know, if there's anything I'm going to criticize about the Renegade series, it is that it took itself a little too seriously, and I just love that this book doesn't. All right, I'm going to shut up about that book. Let's move on to what I read after that, which was Queenie by Candace Carty-Williams. So when I talked about this book in my January TBR, I talked about it in a very misleading way. This book is marketed in a misleading way. So mainly this book has been compared to Bridget Jones's Diary, but I was told by someone in the comments, oh, I cannot remember who told me this anymore. I'm so sorry that I can't remember. Someone told me in the comments that this book is so much darker than Bridget Jones's Diary. It's definitely not a rom-com. It's definitely not a light and fluffy read like Bridget Jones is. So I went into this knowing that things were going to take a dark turn, and boy, do they. So just to tell you a little bit of what this book is about, we have Queenie, our main character. She's in her mid-20s, living in England. Her life is definitely going on a downward spiral. Pretty much at the beginning of the book, we see that her longtime boyfriend has now kicked her out of their apartment, and things just go downhill from there. She makes a lot of questionable decisions, especially when it comes to having a lot of unprotected sex with strangers or just with very sketchy men. First of all, I want to say I never ever judged Queenie while reading this, and I think it's wrong to judge her. This book does take a pretty dark turn pretty early on in relation to these sketchy men that she's having unprotected sex with, basically. And I'm gonna be upfront with you guys, this book does get pretty difficult to read at times, but I'm so glad that I did. Something I have to say is that Queenie, for me personally, I found her to be a very relatable character. Now, I haven't gone through nearly the amount of trauma that she has gone through, because it's not only about like the sketchy men she's dating, but also her childhood was pretty horrific in a lot of ways. So I did not go through nearly what she has gone through, but her journey is very relatable, especially when she starts going to therapy. So a couple of years ago, I was in a pretty deep depression, and there are just a lot of passages in this book that felt very relatable to me in terms of being in a depression. I do recommend this book. I thought it was very well written. I thought it was very real and raw and authentic. So yeah, I ended up giving this 4 stars. Also, one last thing about Queenie is that I loved that towards the end we got to see the beginning of her healing, and I thought that the very end was just perfect. Next book I want to discuss is Bewitching by Jill Barnett. So I was turned on to this book by Jen from the Book Refuge. I remember her raving about this book quite a bit because she had given it 5 stars, and she raved about it in one of her weekly wrap-ups. And so this sounded so good to me. So as you can probably tell by the cover, this is a historical Regency romance version of the show Bewitched. Kind of. So we have our main character, Joy. She is a witch, but she's not a very good witch. She hasn't really controlled her magic at this point. She's still definitely learning, and her aunt is the one trying to teach her how to develop her skills, and it's just not going all that well. So at the very beginning of this book, she has to transport herself via magic to this cottage in the middle of the woods, I think. I think she has to go stay with a distant family member for some reason, but she ends up transporting herself right on top of this man who is the Duke of Belmore. She literally like falls on top of him, and that is their meet cute, and that was really funny. And so the plot basically goes on from there. It ends up being their romance. I'm pretty sure this is a marriage of convenience. It's been a while since I've read it, so I can't quite remember. But one thing I will say is that this book is about 450 pages. It is entirely too long. This could have been edited more. There are a lot of things thrown into the plot of this one, but I enjoyed every page. Like, I can't say that I didn't like this book. So I did end up giving this 4 stars. I thought it was really cute. We do have a sunshine grump trope going on, definitely. And yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend checking it out, especially if you want to check out older historical romances. I think this was published in like 1993, something like that. I think that it's really well done and really adorable. Next book I want to discuss is White Hot by Ilona Andrews. This is book 2 in their Hidden Legacy series. Ilona Andrews is a husband and wife writing duo, which I think is absolutely amazing. So this is an urban fantasy series. We have our main characters, Nevada and Connor Mad Rogan. Yeah, this is basically a continuation of the story from the first book, but now there's kind of a new enemy that they have to take on. This takes place in a world where there was this Osiris serum that gave people magical abilities back in like the late 1800s. So now in present day Houston is where this takes place. We are seeing the aftermath of that. And now there are these powerful magical families that essentially control everything, even though there is a government, but like the magical families pretty much control everything. And I loved this pretty much just as much as the first book, if not even more, because there was more romance in this one. I will say in Burn For Me, which is the first book, there was like a dash of romance between Nevada and Connor, but in this book, there was so much more and I was so here for it. Also, these books are so action-packed and just fun to read. I always have a fun time with them, so I can't wait to read the third and final book in this like trilogy within the series. And then the second trilogy is centering on Catalina, who is Nevada's younger sister, who we get to see more of her in this book, and now I am so pumped to get her story. I just love Nevada's family so much, especially her grandma Frida, and also her mother, because they're both just such badass women. Her mom was in the military and then her grandmother is a mechanic, and she's just so funny and amazing. So yeah, I cannot recommend this series enough. Next up is Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson. This was my very first book by her, and I am so glad that I finally read something from Tiffany D. Jackson, because my God, can she write? I loved this book so much. So just to tell you a little bit about the plot, we have our main character Mary, and she was convicted of killing a baby when she was 9 years old. And so she went to baby jail, and now she has been dumped into a group home for the last few years. This book picks up when she's 16 years old. And so throughout the book, we are seeing this mystery unravel of, did she actually kill this baby? Who did kill the baby if not her? But really this book centers around how she has been treated since being convicted when she was a child. And this is a very dark book at times. I will definitely point that out to you now. I actually wanted to read a quote from Jason Reynolds, who is another very popular YA author. I love him so much, but something that he said about this book, which I just think is so accurate. He said, Tiffany D. Jackson chips at the world, then cracks it, then shatters it into shards of discomfort and complexity for the reader to grapple with. Allegedly, undoubtedly will linger long after it's over. I just feel like this book perfectly puts into words what my reading experience was like. From page 1, I felt so immersed in Mary's mind. Like, I literally felt like I was her. And when a book can make me feel like that, I think that is something truly remarkable. The ending was pretty crazy. I still feel pretty conflicted about it, and I know that a lot of people hated the way that this ended. I still don't know how to feel about it, so yeah, but I had to give this 5 stars. I think that the writing is incredible. The story is pretty dark at times, but it is just so real and honest, and I cannot wait to read more from Tiffany D. Jackson in the very near future. Next book I want to discuss is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So for those of you guys that don't know, this is an adult fantasy romance series that centers on our main character, Poppy. She lives in this kingdom where she is the maiden, and this is a very important role in her kingdom, but she basically has no choice at all in anything that happens in her life. She has to live a very sheltered life. She can't have any romantic relationships. She doesn't really have any friends. Like, she lives a very kind of reclusive life as well. So then we have this man Hawk who comes in to serve as one of her bodyguards, and things get very interesting from there. And wow, I went into this with very high expectations because of how much people have been raving about this on BookTube. But I have to say, my expectations were met and they might have been surpassed. I think that Armentrout did a really good job with the world building. I think that there's a really good balance between fantasy and romance, and that's what you want in a fantasy romance, of course. The romance, my God, between Poppy and Hawk, it was absolutely everything. These two characters have so much chemistry. There's definitely an enemies to lovers aspect to it that I was just completely immersed in. I loved every second of it. I will say this book is slower paced, but I was completely engaged the entire time. Also, I want to mention that there were several plot twists that I saw coming from a mile away, but I didn't even care because I was just loving my reading experience so much. So yeah, of course I gave this 5 stars, and I'm really looking forward to reading A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire very soon. Also, I just want to say that chapter 39 in this book, in my opinion, is the new chapter 55. If you are a fan of the ACOTAR series by Sarah J Maas, you will know that chapter 55 of ACOMAF is very well known. We all know what happens in that chapter, and for me, chapter 39 of this book was that chapter. Next book I want to discuss is Tiny Pretty Things by Sona Kare-Potra and Danielle Clayton. So this is book 1 in a duology. We are centering around this ballet academy in New York City, and we have 3 different POVs that we are following. We have one main character, Gigi, who is Black. She is a new student at this ballet academy. She's the only Black student at this academy, and she definitely shakes things up because she is super talented. She ends up getting the lead role her first semester there. Then we have June, who is Asian, and she is going through bulimia. She's going through a lot of other things, but I do want to point that out, that that is a content warning in this book, is bulimia, which unfortunately is very common in the ballet world. And then we have Bet, who is a character that has also been at this ballet school for years, and she just assumes that she's going to get the lead role in the ballet, but then Gigi gets the lead role. So yeah, there's a lot of drama in this book for sure, and I was here for every second of it. So I think that you're going to love this book as much as I did if you do have formal dance training, because you'll fully understand what all of these characters are going through. But even if you're not a dancer, I think that you'll enjoy this as well. This was basically a teen soap opera in book form. I have watched the first episode of the Netflix adaptation, but I haven't watched more than that, so I can't really talk about, you know, like comparing the two by any means, but this book was everything. Gave it 5 stars. I loved it so much that I had to immediately move on to the sequel, which is Shiny Broken Pieces, again by the same authors. And you know what? I loved the second book almost just as much as the first book. Gave it 5 stars as well. Again, the drama, the tea, it is here in this series, and I was just so here for it. I also loved the way that this book and the series as a whole ended. Yeah, it was just everything. I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you know you enjoy dramatic book series, kind of like American Royals by Katharine McGee, Gossip Girl, things like that. I think that you'll definitely enjoy this. Okay, now we have to talk about my first 2-star read of 2021. I'm actually very sad that I didn't love this book as much as I thought I was going to, and that is The Martian by Andy Weir. So let me preface this by saying this book was not written for me. I went into this thinking that it was going to be a very typical sci-fi thriller. I thought that it was basically going to be like one of those sci-fi thrillery movies, but in book form. And let me tell you, that couldn't be further from the truth with this book. So this does center around our main character, Mark Watney. He became one of the first people to walk on Mars, and now he's sure he'll be the first person to die there, because essentially he is now stranded. He was left for dead by his crew, essentially because there was this terrible dust storm and Mark got hit with a huge piece of debris, and his crew thought he was dead, and so they had to leave without him, and now he is stranded by himself, which, I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds like literally the most terrifying thing I can ever think of, right? But at the end of the day, this book is very cerebral, very scientific. It's also told in the kind of narrative of like, I did this, so then I had to do that, because it's in journal entries. A lot of this book is in journal entries. And because it's so focused on the science of it all, there is very little room for character development, and I think at the end of the day, that is why this book just did not work for me. I didn't absolutely hate this, but again, it just wasn't the book for me. I am going to check out the movie version of this though, because I have a feeling that I'm going to enjoy that more than the book. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to talk about The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. So this is the first book that I read for the Historical Romance Readathon, which is happening at the moment while I'm filming this video, but I finished this on January 15th. So that's why I'm talking about it in this video as opposed to my end of January wrap up. So this is an indie published historical romance. This is my first novel by Courtney Milan that I have read. This will definitely not be my last. I enjoyed this so much. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. So just to tell you what this is about, we have two main characters who are Chinese, which you don't see often at all in historical romances. Historical romance is definitely a very white-centered genre, so I have been looking for more diverse reads within the genre recently. This one centers around Chloe, who is a very organized person. She is a list maker. She takes a clipboard around with her all the time. This takes place in 1890, by the way. And then we have our other main character, Jeremy, who is just a really funny guy. It's kind of a second chance romance because around like 3 years before the book started, they almost started a relationship with each other, but Chloe told him that she needed him to really get serious about his life before trying anything with her. I loved this so much mainly because of Jeremy, our hero. Like I said, he is so funny. Like literally everything that came out of this man's mouth, I was dying. It was just so funny. I also loved this opposites attract romance because like I said, she's more of an uptight, organized person. She also mentions a lot throughout this book that a lot of people tell her she's intimidating, but Jeremy like loves that about her. And I'm so here for that because people have told me that I'm intimidating, so I definitely related to Chloe's character a lot. And yeah, Jeremy was funny, but he was also a super sweet and swoony hero. So yeah, can't recommend this enough. I gave this 4.5 stars. And that's going to be it for this mid-January wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed. I would love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!